let's think about what would be useful for the consumer of the API to know about a paged set of data. At the very least, we should include URIs to request the previous and next pages, so the consumer doesn't have to construct those. Additional information is often included as well. Total count or the total amount of pages, the page number and or page size. But how do we include this data in the response then? What's often done, and you probably already encountered this if you've worked with third-party APIs like Facebook's, is that paging information is included in the response body itself, often with a metadata tag or a paging info tag. You can see an example of that on screen. But this isn't correct. If a consumer of the API requests a page of authors with application JSON as media type value for the accept header, the API should return a JSON representation of the resource. An envelope that includes a result and metadata property isn't a JSON representation of the authors collection resource. It's a different media type. Returning the paging info like this combined with application JSON as media type effectively breaks REST if you're strict, as we're no longer adhering to the self-descriptive message constraint. That constraint states that each message must contain enough information on how to process it. Next to returning the wrong representation, the response will have a content type header with value application JSON, which does not match the content of the response. In other words, we also don't tell the consumer how to process it. The consumer does not know how to interpret the response, judging from the content type. So, when requesting application JSON, pagination information isn't part of the resource representation. It's metadata related to that resource. And metadata, that's something that's put in a response header. The consumer can then parse that header to get that information. So that's what we should do. We should create a custom pagination header like xPagination. To be completely correct, what I currently call metadata is actually a combination of two different things. The links to the previous and next pages tell the consumer of the API how to navigate through the API, and the rest of the information is actual metadata on the paged collection resource that's in the response body. Once we learn about HateOS, we will learn about this in detail and split this up some more. And we will also learn a bit more about these media types and how to use a custom one. But for now, this is sufficient. But how do we do this then? Well, we could just create an additional repository method that returns the metadata, but I'm not a big fan of that. Paged data and the related metadata feel like they belong together. So, in the next two demos, we will do two things. We're going to create a new class, a paged list of T, which will hold the current page, total pages, has previous and has next properties. We don't have to do that, but by doing so, we can reuse that class for other collection resources, like the courses. As we know, it's best practice to page all collection resources by default to avoid an unintended negative impact on performance. And this class will make that easier. Once we have that, we have all the information required to create the metadata. So that's what we'll do in the demo after that. Let's continue.